So as I said, Jason Ravitz, I'm going to be talking about tech and foundation work that I've done. You can see some of the organizations that I've worked with, and um, I'll be talking mostly about Google and the Buck Institute, uh, which gave me a platform to work with a lot of different foundations over the years. And I'll be talking a little bit about what I did with them. First, a little bit about my background. I grew up running around Detroit, downtown Detroit, and my parents were very activist oriented in criminal justice and women's rights. I'm really, I think, a sociologist at heart. I got my degree in sociology and was a certified social studies teacher, but there were no jobs. And so I ended up kind of starting to get into tech and actually teaching computers. I was working at a computer consulting company, and someone showed me the internet, and it just completely blew my mind. This was pre-web, but I kind of just saw the writing on the wall that everything was going to change. And I started spending all my time on the net and decided to get credit, I should go back to school. Um, so I did. I got a PhD in instructional design, and that's where I learned about evaluation. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but the program was instructional design, development, and evaluation. Uh, During grad school, I was commuting back to Boston to work on the National School Network test bed, which was a high-tech test bed of uh, early internet connected schools. And I did my dissertation on conditions for internet use in those schools and assessment strategies and so on. After this, I went and worked on a national survey for my first postdoc at UC Irvine. This was a national survey of computing use and teaching practices. Um, it's kind of a big deal study, still still widely cited. And then for a second postdoc, I kind of got back into the design stuff a little bit more, focusing on technology supported assessments. And I was going to be a professor before foundation world came knocking. One of the things I just want to point out is that the research trajectory and the development design directory was always kind of parallel for me. I was always doing research and evaluation, but always in the context of developing new programs or opportunities for teachers and schools. So one of my surveys got used by the Buck Institute in a statewide study in Idaho, and I started consulting for them around this study, and they brought me in where I stayed for 12 years working at the Buck Institute. This is a nonprofit foundation in Marin County. There's also a Buck Institute for Aging, a Buck Institute for Preventing Alcohol and Drug Abuse, and a Marin Community Foundation. It was this huge civil settlement in California that established these foundations. Also worked with schools and districts, but part of that work included getting a chance to do some work for the Oracle Foundation during the ThinkQuest competition. I helped validate their processes, did work with George Lucas Educational Foundation, the Albertson study I mentioned in Idaho. We had grants from Hewlett to build some online PBL, grant from the Stewart Foundation to evaluate school reform network and so on. So I really enjoyed my 12 years there, and I'd be happy to share a little bit more about what that was like, but it was quite a good run. And we were able to do a lot of really cool work because of I think largely because of our foundation status, and I can talk more about that. Anyway, eventually that kind of petered out, and I moved to Google, where I was actually looking at UX research jobs, but saw an evaluation job where they're evaluating educational outreach. So here again is a chance to kind of join an organization that was making big moves in education and kind of help them establish their research and evaluation. That's what I did, and I kind of expanded from computer science education out into more social impact evaluation as well, which continues to be an area of interest. Some of the foundations I worked with were NCWIT, which is a National Women's in Technology organization, National Girls Collaborative Project, Girl Scouts, AmeriCorps, Boys and Girls Clubs. I'll show you a little bit more about how I took the internal Google job and turned it into externally supporting these orgs. And then the last thing, I haven't been consulting full time for 20 years, but even going back to my grad school days, I've always spent some time consulting. I've only been consulting full time for about a year and a half through my own business, Evaluation by Design. But I like to work with organizations that are doing cool work and help them on design and measurement, analysis, reporting. I see myself as contributing to people who are doing amazing work with research expertise. That's how I see my role. The way I learned about evaluation was through instructional design. And this is a basic instructional design model that has evaluation as a core step when you're designing instruction, that you're doing analysis initially of your learners, designing, developing, implementing, but always evaluating what you're doing. So this is how I learned about evaluation, and I had classes on evaluation at the master's level, and then advanced classes at the grad school level around designing instruction. But quickly realized that evaluation is also not just around instructional design, but part of program development. And this is the RAND model for results-based accountability. And you can see about half of the model is oriented towards evaluating and improving programs. So here you are, or here I was, like looking at the world of interesting programs and a role for evaluation. And that's kind of what I fell into. I love design. I love strategy and all the stuff at the top part of this spectrum too. But I found that there was a lot of need for people who knew how to evaluate, especially in ed tech, because so much was kind of new and people didn't know the best way to evaluate. Kind of staying in the professorial mode for a minute. This is kind of the definition that I used for evaluation when I was teaching about it. Basically, I see it as a form of research. And it's a form of research that's specifically focused on organizational decisions and learning, and establishing merit based on stakeholder perspectives. I'll share more about that, but you can see a couple other definitions that people have used. And I named my company Evaluation by Design to get past this problem. And this problem was evident from my very first project evaluating online. Basically, this is what happens when you don't do evaluation by design. You show up and you're trying to evaluate something that you really can't see. So I don't know if you guys know Chris Lysy, but he has all these great cartoons, and I sent him the idea for this cartoon and he did a great job with it. And what it says is, from the look of the street, seems like a successful event. Oh, are you here to help with cleanup? No, I'm the evaluator. One of my proposed captions was healthy horses, check. The idea is like you're walking after the parade and you're trying to evaluate it. And this is what it felt like, parachuting in or being, called in as a hired gun to come in and evaluate a project after the ship has kind of sailed. And I think probably a lot of you can relate to this. Chris is a great artist compared to me, because my version is the other side of this, why I asked Chris to draw. But this is kind of the other side of that, which is the evaluation is baked into the cake. It's going to be delicious. And this is where I am trying to get to in my practice, so that I can look forward to waking up every day and doing great evaluation work with people, because we've been thinking about it all along. So these were the kind of ideas that got me in the door at Google, I think. I think the fact that I had some education reform background and the technology and thoughts about increasing evaluation capacity got me this role. They didn't have a role like it before. And in retrospect, I'm just so grateful that they established this for the time that they did. The way I defined the work was really 4 pillars. One was just elevating evaluation quality for individual programs. So just going to individual programs and helping them evaluate better. But then I also had this idea of seeing the need across the company for many programs, not only in education, but just kind of promoting evaluation across the company, which was very impactful and successful for a while. But really, one of the interesting things I'm so glad I was able to do is make the case for supporting the field. Because Google, of course, is a major funder of computer science education, and has all these programs that it funds or has supported or established. You know, you go to these conferences and Google's a sponsor of all these things. And the issue was, okay, as someone in-house who wants to evaluate these, how do we communicate with folks out in the field who are in nonprofits and in foundations and don't have capacity to have evaluation conversations with us? And so I spent a lot of time out in the field supporting different groups that Google had funded or were working with. And then, of course, being a tech company, I was focused on providing tools and services to do this work. So that's kind of the vision. And I'm just going to show you a few examples of things that I created that proved to be really useful. One was an evaluation planning process that I taught in a course that was offered, a dozen times across the company. I traveled around and taught it online. Basically, evaluation planning 101. A lot of this came from my coursework with Nick Smith in grad school at Syracuse, but basic evaluation planning. And there's a webinar on my website that you can see where I talk through this process more. So I'm not going to go into detail here. But basically, describing the program and then understanding why you're evaluating before you dive in and start planning the evaluation. The key thing here is kind of the evaluation questions and data collection doesn't come into the middle of part C. And you'll see why that's important here. There's a picture of me teaching one of the classes at Google. This was something I presented at AEA a few years back in a session on social impact evaluation. And some of you may recognize David Federman here, who was the founder of empowerment evaluation, which is a methodology I'm really interested in. And we had a lot of great conversations about how to view the work we were doing through a lens of empowerment. And as a result of teaching this class, this is the type of, qualitative evidence I collected after the course, saying that, this really helped us, people saying this really helped us focus, it helped us, think about the longer term impacts of our work, helped us think about where we were in the process, particularly this issue about, are you really ready for an outcomes evaluation, was something that we discussed quite a lot. Bigger picture, I think a big part of my role was establishing demand. And I've talked with, some higher ups at NSF and others that, there's increasing consensus, I think, that you can't just throw expertise at a problem or throw expert evaluators if there isn't kind of an appetite to work with an evaluation mindset, and if there isn't the capacity to kind of, turn the focus in that direction. So, where does this demand for evaluation come from? Well, back in the day, NSF, really made a strong statement about evaluation should be a part and parcel of every project from the start. And they may have stepped back from that in some ways, but I still buy into that very much. One story I really like to tell is from an outreach director at MIT who had students coming in for a summer program and started collecting baseline data from the students for her evaluation, and realized that the professors in this summer program might want to know a little bit about the students who were coming in. And sure enough, she started sharing some of her baseline evaluation data with the professors, and they loved it because they got to know their students in advance. And so once they saw how useful the data were, they asked for more. That's the type of story I love to tell. And then I really think like this internal client testimony is like the ultimate outcome for me was, I always considered evaluation an afterthought, but now it's central and I can't imagine developing a program without it. So Google's a big company, and there's a lot of activity going on. And the way I kept my team accountable for promoting evaluation and help keep track of teams' progress was through this, which I invented. It's not comprehensive of every step you go through, but I feel like these were discrete things where we could track progress. The key thing to notice is stage one is having some measures or talking about evaluation. This was the main insight, that a lot of people, Google's a data-oriented company. They have measures all over the place. And a lot of people think that's what evaluation is. You measure stuff, and I made a real point of saying that's stage one, having measures. So you're not done yet. Stage two is mapping those measures to questions, or vice versa, having questions that you can map to measures. And stage three was actually having some answers to those questions based on data. And then stage four was using that to influence the program, showing some change in the program. Stage five is getting into the political realm of making sure people know that happened. So important. That the senior managers get a view into what the result of these efforts was, and then hopefully say, yeah, we want more of this, we want to institutionalize it. So we tracked, we were supporting many projects and kind of tracking their progress on these, hoping that all of them would be improving their practices through evaluation and telling that story to management. I had a small team. We maxed out at 5 at one point, and there's a lot of time pressures in that context. And so this was kind of a model, again, presented at AEA, where kind of the really heavy lifting on my part was kind of the highest touch, highest level of support. We could only do that pretty infrequently. Easier or lower level of effort had to do with managing external evaluations, which I did a lot, and just helped teams set up with external evaluators, which could have been some of you. And then also just influencing and advising projects, and then kind of having self-help, low touch training materials. I mentioned supporting the field, which I want to come back to. One of the big projects was this Computer Science Outreach Program Evaluation Network, CS Open. This was a featured project. It was in our White House commitments for 2 years. We actually launched this at a White House event, and it was funding a cohort of nonprofits. We did it twice, 2 years in a row, to build up their evaluation capacity together and have shared conversations around evaluating their CS programs. It's a really exciting model that I want to pursue further. Also created a network of CS evaluators, kind of like what Matt's done here, just realizing that there's such a great need out there. You can check out my website, evaluation.design.com/evaluation_capacity_building for more info on those. One of the tools we created was an online version of empowerment evaluation. This is a session at an NSF PI meeting, all the evaluators getting together and going through an empowerment evaluation among ourselves about how evaluation of this program was going. And that was kind of a cool tool. David and I taught this workshop at AERA and AEA a couple times, and the tool is available. And then we did research in the field. I just wanted to briefly mention, outside the evaluation work, there's some big studies about, what influences women going into CS. And then this one was one of the cooler projects. It was a CS in media project where Google was influencing television show content to try to increase diversity. And we did a big study. This came back from a search. Oops, now Google thinks I'm talking to them, sorry. It was, we worked with USC and Nielsen and an online program to really evaluate the impact of changing characters in shows. The Foster's Mariana character was one of the big ones initially, if anyone saw that. So this all sounds really, really great, right? There were some battles to be had, and I wanted to mention this before I close. You know, not everyone was completely on board with this always, and there's some countervailing winds that we were sailing against. One is that research is expensive, evaluation is expensive, takes money away from program and staff. And this is actually something that came up at the Buck Institute after, you know, our third strategic planning session. At some point, it was, you know, just a question of resources and space and the need for more research versus kind of being satisfied with what folks had at that point. This question about being too easily satisfied is one that I come back to a lot. But research also slows us down. You know, things are super fast paced in tech. And there's this view of research and evaluation as kind of nitpicky. Anyone who saw Soul, I had very, very serious issues with this character of Terry. Like, I'm enraged by certain aspects of this character, and I'm going to write a letter to my friend who worked on this movie about it, specifically regarding trying to make data science more appealing and then making the data, you know, the data person kind of the villain of this movie. I won't say more about it if you haven't seen it. But there's this sense that, you know, evaluation is kind of disconnected from reality. This is like showing up at the parade after the parade. Like, hey, I was at the parade. It was awesome. Now this evaluator is going through and picking through all the refuse. We don't need them. We were there. We saw it with our own eyes. Kind of our gut instinct is what matters. There's a sense that science is too conservative. And I think I'm coming around to this myself. Like, if you think about climate change, it's like, you know, science wants to make double sure that they're not drawing a conclusion too soon when maybe they should have been drawing it sooner. And there's a sense that this is a great program. We don't need to do more research on this. There's this real sense of expertise not needing evaluators. I think this is in the tech world quite a bit, actually. And there's a kind of an engineering mindset where, well, it worked. What do we need to evaluate? Like, we tried 100 things, it didn't work, then it worked. Now it works. We don't need this Jason guy for anything. But this approach about this engineering mindset is quite concerning. And that is that, you know, in engineering, you break things. That's how you learn. You know, try 100 things that don't work. That's fantastic. Great job, everyone. Well, you know, the educator mindset is like, no, let's protect our kids from that, okay? So that's kind of like some of the tensions that I wanted to draw attention to, so you don't think it was just a cakewalk all the time, because it really wasn't. You know, I wanted to share this image, like this is a, you know, a type of event that, you know, maybe I was asked to evaluate at some point. And there's a lot of face validity when you look at this that says there's good things happening here. And as an evaluator, you know, there's a lot of really exciting opportunities here, but there's also different purposes for an event like this. This is really a marketing event. They're not really wanting to collect deep data necessarily. You know, they're probably going to just ask a couple questions to show that it happened and it was good and they should do it again. You know, it's not really a great research opportunity. And as an evaluator, you know, do I want to be the one who comes in and says, no, you shouldn't be taking this trip to the conference in San Diego? And I wasn't involved in this at all. I'm just being hypothetical, but you can see that there's this idea of, this is obviously great. We should obviously do this everywhere. And then as the evaluator, you have to kind of see where you want to push back on thoughts like that. These are a couple of my current clients now. I'm doing a social emotional learning study for a curriculum it's a small mom and pop shop, and I love it and they love me, and it's a love fest, and it's just a great little project, and it pays really well, and we're in great great shape. Another example is the Last Tomorrow Education Fund, which one of you was talking about college completion might want to take a look at. In this case, again, I'm helping to set them up for success by giving them an evaluation plan that they can use to move their project forward. I'm gonna stop because I think there's probably a lot of questions and I've probably talked enough already. But hopefully you see that I guess one of the main things is that it isn't built in, the evaluation. You have to kind of make the case and find the opportunities. It's not like every NSF project is automatically going to have an evaluator. So you really have to kind of show that you're providing value and then fit in with the culture and the context. There's some great things that can happen. The Buck Institute was foundation funded, so we could really take our time on projects and really get it right. That was one of the things I loved, not having like this 3-year cycle where, the server, oh, we need that server for something now, project over type of thing. So those are some of my reflections, and I'd be happy to, hopefully it's helpful. And if you have things I didn't address, I'd be happy to try to